A car accident, and I ended up as the supporting character in a CEO romance novel, the ex-wife of the protagonist. Thinking about the miserable fate of the original wife, I quickly signed my own name on the divorce agreement. The CEO's face turned dark. "Sonia, have you really thought this through?" My heart skipped a beat, and I tightly held onto my purse. Just kidding, there's no way I'm giving back a single penny of the exorbitant divorce settlement. Chapter 1. After lying in the hospital bed for 3 days, I finally accepted the reality of transmigration. I, Sonia, an ordinary female college student, transmigrated into the role of a malicious supporting character in a cliché CEO romance novel. I am the ex-wife of the CEO, taking advantage of my wealthy and influential family to do as I pleased. At the university opening ceremony, I fell in love at first sight with the male lead, George, and relentlessly pursued him, using every means to force him into marriage with me. George, the typical campus romance male lead, handsome and outstanding, came from a poor background. His father was deaf and mute, and his mother had kidney disease. To raise money for his mother's medical expenses, he chose to compromise and marry me. In our 5-year marriage, George transformed from a silent and unknown employee into a rising star in the business world. However, our relationship deteriorated over time. George gradually broke free from my control, but I remained ignorant and arrogant, until I pushed him, the love of his life, down the stairs, causing him to break his leg. Unable to bear it any longer, George asked for a divorce. That's when the car accident happened. It wasn't until the 3rd day that George came to see me, throwing the divorce agreement directly at me. "Sonia, have you had enough?" His voice was cold, filled with impatience and disgust. But even so, when I caught a glimpse of his face, my heart skipped a beat. No wonder the original host was crazy. Damn, this face is so handsome. Then, I glanced at the divorce agreement and saw the amount of property I could claim. My heart stopped abruptly. I hit the jackpot. The original host's family was wealthy, but she had a younger brother who would inherit the company, leaving her with nothing. On the other hand, George had achieved considerable success in just a few years of entrepreneurship, with substantial assets. Once we divorced, the settlement would be astonishing. I had led a virtuous and charitable life, and this was the deserving outcome of my sudden wealth. After calculating the money I could get, I suppressed my excitement, lowered my head in silence for a long time, afraid that a smile would betray my true intentions to George. Then, I took a deep breath. Fine, I agree to the divorce. George was taken aback. He probably didn't expect me to agree so readily. But seize the opportunity when it presents itself. Before he could regain his composure, I swiftly signed my name on the divorce agreement. George seemed to sense something was wrong, his eyebrows furrowing. "You." I turned my head away, wiped away the non-existent tears from the corners of my eyes, and softly spoke, my heart as lifeless as ashes. "I've come to my senses, George. Let's forgive each other." There was silence behind me for a while. It wasn't until I was about to count my savings in bed again that I noticed George was silently looking at the divorce agreement, motionless. Curiously, I asked, "Aren't you leaving yet?" George raised his gaze. I gently reminded him, Mary's injury hasn't healed yet, right? Shouldn't you go and check on her?" George's face suddenly turned grave. Chapter 2. I'm a little worried. Could this man be regretting giving me so much money? But my name is already signed, he can't deny it. Besides, considering how understanding I am now, it's only right that he gives me money. When George was in college, there was a girl named Mary. Unlike the arrogant and spoiled Miss, Mary was beautiful, gentle, and sensible. She came from a single-parent family, and their conditions weren't great, but she herself was very ambitious and excelled in all aspects. In a way, she and George were the same kind of people, and only she could understand him, being his soulmate. If it weren't for me, they would have naturally ended up together and created a happy family in this city after graduating from college. I ruined everything. In the original story, Sonia was insanely jealous of Mary, constantly causing trouble and even pushing her to the point of madness. Later on, George completely grew tired of Sonia and broke ties with her. Just think about it, if I offend both the male and female leads, how miserable will be my fate as the vicious supporting character. So, I better take the money and run while I can. George finally stormed out of the door. I patted my chest and smirked, he sure has a temper. But then I thought about the assets I could get, and I became happy again. I couldn't wait to open the online shopping website and plan to buy everything after I get discharged from the hospital. Just as I was thinking that, I suddenly received a WeChat message on my phone from Charlie. I heard that George finally came to see you today. His words were full of mockery. Charlie is Sonia's childhood friend, a playboy who excels in indulging in food and entertainment. He doesn't like George, and George doesn't like him either. They are very hostile towards each other. Especially after I got married to George, our families had frequent interactions, and Charlie's father belittled him more than once, causing Charlie to be even more annoyed with George. He called me a love-struck fool and constantly made me go to his vegetable garden to dig vegetables. This time, he's obviously here to see me make a fool of myself again. But do I care? Come on, I'm busy getting rich and counting my money. I don't have time to dwell on love and heartbreak. Yeah, I thought for a moment and directly sent him the divorce agreement. From today, I'm single again. Take me out for dinner. He immediately called me, and his first words were, "Have you gone crazy?" TSK, he's so rude. I'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get it stamped once I'm discharged. Fortunately, my car accident wasn't too serious, just a minor head injury and a mild concussion. Don't you have anything to say? Charlie remained silent for a moment, then suddenly laughed. All right. And what does Miss Sonia want as compensation? Me, I heard you opened a new bar. A week later, I put on a strapless sequin dress and gracefully left the hospital. Charlie bit his cigarette and casually threw a coat over to me. Put this on, you don't look presentable wearing this in the hospital. I rolled my eyes at him. What do you know? Today is a good day. Charlie ignored me and turned to leave, unexpectedly bumping into George on his way out. George's gaze stopped at the coat on my shoulder, his expression turning cold. You're here. I walked over, smiling at him. Where's the car? George's expression softened slightly. In the parking lot. Let's go. Charlie couldn't stand it and squinted at me. Sonia, aren't you going in my car? I waved my hand. Oh, no, I have to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau with George to get the divorce certificate. It's more convenient to take his car. Saying that, I urged the suddenly stiffened George. Why are you standing there? Let's go. Chapter 3. Charlie smiled and said, Yeah, you're right. This is serious business, no time to waste. George sarcastically pulled the corner of his mouth and said, Sonia, are you so eager to distance yourself from me? Wasn't it you who asked for the divorce? What's with your snide remarks? I honestly replied, I have other plans for tonight, so I thought it would be better to resolve this early and not waste your time. George was always busy, and he rarely came home on weekdays. I knew he didn't want to see me, and I had no intention of continuing to entangle with him. Everyone should go their separate ways, live their own lives, isn't that great? George turned away with a cold face. On a weekday, the Civil Affairs Bureau wasn't crowded, and it didn't take long for George and me to be called. Just as we were about to go in, George's phone suddenly rang. I glanced at it from the corner of my eye. It was Mary. George stepped aside to answer the call, and I faintly heard him speaking gently and patiently. Still outside, something came up. He had never spoken to Sonia with such a tone before. This marriage was forced from the beginning, 5 long years of constant conflict. We couldn't even have a proper meal together, let alone this kind of caring conversation. The staff urged us, are you going to proceed or not? I shook my head, feeling a bit sorry for the original owner. In George's heart, she really didn't have any place at all. George, I called out to him, can we handle my matter first this time? George, he always put Mary first, no matter how much Sonia cried or made a scene, he remained indifferent. The original owner was also foolish, actually thinking she could win over Mary. Wasn't that asking for trouble? George as well, if he deals with me first this time, he can openly be with his beloved Mary sooner, right? George's expression suddenly froze, then he said to the person on the phone, "Let Dr. Zhang take a look first, I'll be there soon." 20 minutes later, I held the freshly printed divorce certificate, tears welling up in my eyes. I got it. I got my huge separation fee. From today onwards, shopping, traveling, drinking, I will live as a happy person. I sincerely said to George, "George, thank you, goodbye. Thank you for your money, and I won't see you again." I walked out and immediately saw Charlie. He was driving a flashy red Ferrari, very eye-catching, hard to miss. I happily walked over with small quick steps. "I have money. I want to spend." Suddenly, I heard George's somewhat hesitant voice from behind, "Sonia." I hurriedly turned around. "Do you have something else?" George's gaze was dark, his emotions unclear for a moment. If it were the original owner, upon seeing his obvious change in emotions, she would definitely dig deeper and ask for a clear explanation, but I was too lazy to pretend. "No, I'm leaving." I quickened my pace. As a cannon fodder like me, the key to happiness is to distance myself from the main characters as soon as possible. When I left in Charlie's car, I took a quick glance at the rearview mirror, and there was George standing there, surrounded by people, inexplicably lonely. Ah, without me, this troublemaker bothering him, he finally found relief, right? Charlie glanced at me, reluctant. I enthusiastically replied, "Keep all the cute guys in your store for me, okay?" Chapter 4. Charlie was speechless. "I really wasted my efforts on you. I used to think you loved him so much, but after this divorce, you have a happy expression on your face." "Oh, is it that obvious?" I glanced at the rearview mirror and carefully examined myself. Sonia, now 28 years old, although she suddenly aged 10 years, fortunately, her face is still beautiful and radiant, and most importantly, she's rich. I thought for a moment and gave an explanation. If he doesn't love me, then I might as well stop loving him. In the gap between traffic lights, Charlie turned to look at me for a while. Until I felt a chill down my spine, he finally spoke with an ambiguous tone. "You seem like a different person after this car accident." My heart skipped a beat, and I remained quiet for a moment, shrugging my shoulders. Perhaps experiencing life and death makes people see things differently. Charlie was dumbfounded, but after a moment, he smiled too. "You have a point. All right, tonight, I'll treat you." 2 hours later, Charlie regretted it. He frowned. Still not enough? He wasn't referring to the drinks, but rather the attractive guys in the bar. "Oh no, I mean the younger brothers." I raised my glass to him. "Come on, have a drink with me." "Charlie." I patted his shoulder and pointed to the group of handsome younger brothers. "Look, they are all sweet talkers and good-looking. Aren't they better than my ex-husband?" The original me was the same, with so many handsome guys in the world, and she had both money and looks. Why did she have to fixate on that one tree? People, they're afraid of getting stuck in their ways. Charlie chuckled. "You finally stopped being blind?" A slim and handsome younger brother came over to pour me a drink, very obediently. "Sister, try this?" "Sure, why not?" I was about to happily accept it, but Charlie snatched it away. "No mixing drinks for you. You just got out of the hospital, and I don't want to call 911 for you later." Saying that, he glanced at the guy, who turned pale instantly and quickly apologized. "Sorry, sister, I didn't know you." I waved my hand generously. "It's all right. Today, sister is happy." Then I glanced at Charlie with a teasing tone. "You, only officials are allowed to set fires, but not the common people. When your girlfriends feed you drinks, you're happy, but when it comes to me, it's not allowed." Charlie laughed in exasperation. "Is that comparable?" "Why not? I'm a newly minted rich woman, I can do whatever I want." Suddenly, Charlie asked, "By the way, does your family know about this?" I froze for a moment. Oh damn. I forgot about that. Before I could say anything, Charlie looked like he had already figured it all out. "I knew you wouldn't dare to tell them." "It's not that I didn't want to, but I didn't dare. The original me didn't have a good relationship with my family. They were traditional and favored boys over girls. They were stubborn, and she was rebellious. They had a lot of conflicts when she decided to marry George. Later, when George became successful, their attitude towards her did a complete 180, blaming her for constantly arguing with George. Anyway, those days as the malicious supporting character weren't easy either. But with the divorce certificate in hand, what do I have to fear? The following days were even happier than I had imagined. I had my aunt pack and send all of George's things away. This villa was originally bought by the original me's parents as their wedding house, but George didn't like staying here overnight. Perhaps every corner reminded him of the humiliation Sonia once brought him. At first, he mostly stayed at his office, but as his career took off, he bought an apartment near the office. I went there once, and coincidentally, I ran into Mary. How awkward, you tell me. Although Mary immediately explained that she was only seeking shelter from the rain temporarily, how could Sonia not be angry with her temper? They had a big fight that time and didn't speak to each other for a month. In the end, it was Sonia who couldn't bear it and took the initiative to compromise. Who made her have George in her eyes and heart, sigh. But now, things were different. This luxurious 3-story villa was all mine. George didn't have much here, but after clearing it out, it still felt a bit empty, so I immediately went shopping. And then I started to give orders at my favorite stores. Don't take this, and this, but please wrap up the rest for me. The store manager's face was beaming with joy. She was happy, and I was happy too. A few shop assistants followed behind me, helping me carry the items. Unexpectedly, as soon as we stepped out, we ran into George. When he saw me, he was taken aback. And I had already spotted Mary standing right behind him. Chapter 5. It seems like her leg injury has almost healed if she can come to the mall like this. George's lips moved, and he took the initiative to speak. Her mother's birthday is coming up, so I'm here to help her pick a gift. I blinked. Oh. Why is he telling me this? I don't care. Out of politeness, I still nodded politely. But before I could take a step to say goodbye, Mary spoke up. She seemed a bit apologetic in her expression. Sonia, I'm sorry. My leg is still not very convenient, so I asked George to help me come here. I see you've bought a lot of things. Is it difficult for you to carry them? Why don't you let George drive you? I'll be fine on my own. Listen, what do you call the art of conversation? She's reminding George that I pushed her, implying that I shouldn't be jealous, and generously offering George to me. I smiled and said, no need, my car is downstairs. Besides, it's a private matter, no need to trouble George. Mary widened her eyes slightly. What? I was surprised too and looked at George. George, haven't you told Mary that we're divorced? Silence. Mary looked at George in astonishment. George clenched his jaw, his face not looking good. I don't like to publicize personal matters. So he's talking behind my back? Didn't I throw a few divorce celebration parties? Why is he being so petty? Mary seemed taken aback by this bombshell, and she opened her mouth. George, you and Sonia. You didn't tell me. Why didn't you say anything? Upon hearing her voice, George seemed to remember that she was there too. His eyebrows twitched, and after a moment's pause, he explained in a low voice, I've been busy lately. He used to use this excuse to brush off Sonia, but who would have thought that the tables would turn, and Mary would also receive this treatment? But the main character and the supporting role are different after all. For Mary, this sentence is a huge piece of good news. Her gaze circled between me and George, and she stuck out her tongue apologetically, seemingly saying, Sorry, I didn't know before. I didn't mention it on purpose. Sonia, you don't mind, do you? Of course, I don't mind. He's just a man I have no connection with anymore. You two go ahead and enjoy. I'll leave now. Just as I took a step, George suddenly said, Wait. I turned back. Does George have something else to say? George furrowed his brow, seeming not accustomed to the sudden change in my attitude. Mom said you haven't visited her in a long time. George's voice lowered, as if it was difficult to say, but he had no choice. If you have time, go see her. He was referring to his mother, who had kidney disease. Unlike George, his mother had always liked Sonia. Because George had never told her that he was forced to marry Sonia. In the old woman's heart, Sonia, the daughter of a wealthy family, didn't mind marrying into the George's modest conditions and wholeheartedly devoted herself to George. Naturally, she saw Sonia in a favorable light. During the early days of their marriage, to please George, Sonia had always taken the initiative to take care of his mother, winning her favor. She knew this was her last bargaining chip. George was filial, and even if it was just for this, he wouldn't easily break ties with her. But when Sonia laid hands on Mary, crossing his bottom line, she lost this last trump card. I thought for a moment and agreed, okay, tomorrow then. After all, the old woman hadn't done anything wrong. George's expression relaxed, and he naturally continued, then I'll come to pick you up tomorrow morning. I smiled at him and jingled the car keys. No need, I have hands and feet, I can move around easily. I'll drive myself, so you don't have to bother, George. George and Mary's expressions froze at the same time. Chapter 6. Early the next morning, I set off for the nursing home. This upscale nursing home is located in the suburbs, with excellent facilities and good service. Of course, it comes with a hefty price tag. The caregiver noticed me and politely greeted me. She was someone George had hired, aware of the strained relationship between George and me, which made her distant towards me as well. George's mother was lying in bed, her body frail and emaciated from years of suffering from kidney disease. But fortunately, her condition had improved somewhat during her time in the nursing home. The caregiver's gaze briefly lingered on the food box in my hands, and she sneered with a hint of disdain. Even a caregiver looks down on my attempts to please, because she knows that no matter what I do, it will only provoke George's disgust. Sonia, George's mother, saw me and a gentle smile appeared on her face. Have you been busy lately? It's been a while since I last saw you. I sighed inwardly. Sonia had only used her from beginning to end, but she took it to heart. The old woman hadn't done anything wrong. Yes, a little bit. I brought you some chicken soup. You can have it later. However, George's mother held onto my hand, looked at me for a while, and cautiously asked, Did George's child upset you again? I shook my head, but George's mother didn't believe me. She sighed helplessly. George has always been stubborn since he was young, and he likes to keep things to himself. If he upsets you, you tell Mom, and Mom will talk to him for you. I felt even more guilty. I had planned to tell her about the divorce, but now it was stuck in my throat, and I couldn't bring myself to say it. I had a meal with George's mother and talked with her for a while before leaving. Before I left, I hesitated for a long time and finally mustered the courage to say, I will continue to be busy for some time, so I'm afraid I won't be able to come and accompany you often. First, I'll reduce the frequency, and then find a suitable time to tell her. It should be much better that way. I can't keep it a secret forever. I'm willing to, but George won't agree. If I come too often, he'll probably think I still have ulterior motives. George's mother patted my hand and let out a soft sigh. Sonia, you're a good child. What happened before was George's fault, even though he never mentioned it to me. I know he feels guilty and regrets it. He loved you so much, and losing the child, how could he not be in pain? My heart skipped a beat. The child. Yes, that was the catalyst that completely shattered the relationship between Sonia and George. Chapter 7. Yes, Sonia actually had a child before. She conceived the child using all means possible while George was out drinking and socializing. In any case, the arrival of this child was not so straightforward. But in Sonia's eyes, it was the most powerful weapon to keep George by her side. After discovering the pregnancy, George felt guilty towards Mary, the moonlight, on one hand, and on the other hand, he couldn't let go of his own flesh and blood. In the end, he chose the child. His own childhood had been difficult enough, so he couldn't bear for his child to be born into a broken family. During that time, it was when his relationship with Sonia was at its best. He would buy nutritional supplements for Sonia and read many parenting guides. He truly wanted to be a good father. That's why he got so angry when he found out that Sonia intentionally had an abortion. This whole situation is quite bizarre. After Sonia became pregnant, she felt that George's attitude was improving, so she took advantage of it and wanted him to be by her side all the time. Every time George tried to refuse, she would pretend to be unwell, forcing George to compromise. After this happened several times, George could naturally see through her tricks. One time, Sonia called George again, saying that her stomach was hurting and asking George to come home quickly. But that day, Mary suddenly had a high fever, and George was at the hospital taking care of her, so he didn't go back home. "Sonia, are you not tired of playing the story of the boy who cried wolf?" His voice over the phone was calm, but it thoroughly annoyed Sonia. In a fit of anger, she actually went to the hospital and had the child aborted. She wanted to make George realize that the wolf really would come. As you can imagine, this incident completely shattered their relationship, causing chaos and turmoil. If before this, George was disgusted with Sonia, then after this, hatred was added to the mix. He never set foot in their marital home again and had no contact with Sonia whatsoever. Until Sonia went to find Mary and pushed her off the building. That was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Well, it's no wonder the original owner went crazy. When they get ruthless, they spare no one, not even themselves. I fell silent for a while and said, "It's all in the past. The original Sonia is already dead, and these matters have come to an end." Coming out of the nursing home, I felt a bit emotional. I wasn't sure if it was for George's mother or for the original Sonia. And then, this emotional state reached its peak when I realized that I had accidentally lost my car keys. The book mentioned before that Sonia was malicious and self-destructive, but it didn't say anything about her being forgetful. In despair, I called Charlie. "Pick me up, hurry." Charlie found it outrageous. "Am I your chauffeur? Do I have to be at your beck and call?" "I'm not refusing to pay you," I said. "Charlie, this nursing home is quite remote, and it's inconvenient to get a taxi." Then Charlie reluctantly came, and by the time we got back home, it was already dark. To make matters worse, it started pouring rain. Looking at the heavy rain outside, I took pity on Charlie and let him stay, giving him the guest room on the second floor to sleep in. But unexpectedly, the next morning, someone rang the doorbell. "Help! Who calls for help so early in the morning?" I groggily went to open the door. "Who? Why are you here?" Standing outside the door was none other than George. He was about to speak when footsteps came from the stairs, and Charlie's voice carried clear annoyance from being woken up. "Who is it?" George's face instantly turned dark, and every word seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth. "It seems I came at the wrong time. I apologize for disturbing you." Chapter 8. My heart rolled its eyes. "You know very well that you disturbed my peaceful sleep, right? And why are you making such a face? This is my house, all right. You're just an ex-husband. What right do you have to be angry and wear that expression of being cuckolded for everyone to see? You've been putting that hat on me for so long, I've already let it go." I turned to Charlie and said, "There's nothing going on, go back to sleep." Charlie, this spoiled young master, has a big temper. After all, he got stuck in the rain because of me, and I can't even guarantee him a good night's sleep. Charlie saw George and seemed to sober up a bit, lazily smiling. "Oh, we have a guest. It would be impolite for me to go back to sleep. Sonia, why don't you invite him in?" "Me? See, I told you this man goes crazy when he hasn't slept well." I couldn't be bothered with him, so I looked at George again and had no intention of letting him in. I had just cleaned up his things, and I didn't want to dirty the house again. I'd have to trouble Auntie to clean it up later. "It's early, George. Is there something you need?" I asked. George's face turned slightly pale. It was obvious that Charlie's few words had hit a nerve. But he couldn't lose his temper. In the past, he could have simply kicked Charlie out as the master of the house, but now, he couldn't even match Charlie, he couldn't even enter through the front door. But men like him can endure a lot, and George is no exception. He took a deep breath, ignored Charlie, and took out a key from his pocket to hand it over. "You left it at my mom's place yesterday. She kept reminding me to bring it to you." Meaning, he came here purely on his mother's behalf. "Oh, thank you. Actually, you didn't have to go through the trouble. I have a spare key." I took the key and said. George was speechless for a moment. I waited a few seconds, but I was impatient. I gently reminded him, "George, do you have something else?" If George couldn't sense that I was rushing him, then he wouldn't have achieved his position today. He pressed his lips together. No. Bang. I closed the door directly. Charlie stood on the stairs, looking at me. I was puzzled. Aren't you going back to get some rest? Why are you staring at me like that? Charlie squinted his eyes slightly, arms crossed. It's nothing, I just feel. You seem a bit heartless towards your ex-husband, he said lazily. I was extremely speechless. If you have nothing to say, you don't have to say anything. Charlie raised his chin. Sonia, don't tell me you can't see what he's thinking. I asked back, what is he thinking? Charlie leaned back, his voice lazy. He wants to see you, doesn't he? Otherwise.